students, we welcome you on the ETH306W module. The purpose of this presentation is to guide you, support, and also to help you to prepare for the coming examinations, which will be on the 27th of November. This module is coordinated by 3 lecturers. It's myself, Motitswe, Mr. Mkhuma, and Mr. Mbelu. Mr. Mkhuma, can you please take the students through on where to study and what to read, as well as the rationale and the purpose of the study?
Thank you so much, Dr. Motitswe. Greetings, students. I'm not trying to provide a scope that you should use when preparing for exam, but these are just guidelines that will guide you when you are reading in preparation for the exam. Number one, you should go through the specific outcomes in tutorial letter 101, the assessment criteria for this module, and the demarcation of this module in the study guide. Remember, the study guide consists of about 460 something pages. You don't have to read everything in the study guide, but the pages that are specifically related to the expectations of these modules are listed on page 18 to 19. We also have tutorial letter 101, which provides additional information on autism and Down syndrome. There is tutorial letter 201, which provides feedback for assignment 2, and there is a list of recommended books that you'll find on page 6 and 7 of tutorial letter 101. This should assist you to get a broader understanding of what we are trying to do in this module. We would like to emphasize that whenever you write your exam, we expect you to write in English.
Okay.
The main focus of this module, ETH306, first we speak about why inclusive education had to be adopted in South Africa. There are operational concepts that you have to master if you are competent in this module. There is also manifestations of intrinsic as well as extrinsic barriers, as well as classroom support for learners experiencing barriers to learning and development. Please read all those sections. They are listed throughout the content of this module as we have provided on page 18 to 19 of tutorial letter 101. Let me start by speaking about the rationale for inclusive education in South Africa. Remember previously there was no inclusive education, and then somewhere else the inclusive education was introduced in South Africa. The question is, did we need this in inclusive education? Do we need it now? So you will go to Appendix N, which has got education, a copy of Education White Paper 6, which is a guiding document in the implementation of inclusive education. In that document, Education White Paper 6, you will see that inclusive education was accepted in South Africa because it promotes human rights for all learners in the education system. I want to correct you, maybe some of you who may have misunderstanding about this. Inclusive education is not about specific learners in the education system, such as learners with impairments or disabled learners. It's about all learners in the system, because we believe that all learners require support in order to achieve to the best of their level. It also assists to identify and address barriers. I have said previously that you will find in this module that there are intrinsic barriers and also extrinsic barriers. So through the framework inclusive education, we are able as teachers to identify whether it is intrinsic or extrinsic barriers, but we are able to identify them and also address them. And lastly, we also adopted inclusive education because it focuses on the barriers within the system. Previously, the education system was designed in such a way that everything that went wrong with our learners were assigned to the problems that were within the learners. Now, with inclusive education, we get an opportunity to focus on the barriers that are in the system. If you go through the list of extrinsic barriers, you will find a wide range of extrinsic barriers or barriers that are in the system of education, which we as teachers have to identify and address in order to provide support to all of our learners.
Right, students, now let's look at the operational concepts. The operational concepts are basically those concepts that are widely used in the module. In other words, you go through the module, you're dealing with these concepts, so we call them operational concepts. For instance, barriers to learning, that is a very important concept when we're talking about inclusion. What are barriers to learning? Mr. Mkhuma has alluded to the fact that there are different kinds of barriers, but if you look at the English meaning of a barrier is something that hampers, something that hinders, that's something that prevents something from happening. So when we're talking about barriers to learning, we're basically talking about those factors that cause learning not to continue the way it's supposed to continue. Those factors that cause learning not to take place in a way or in a manner that is expected, we call them barriers to learning. So disability, for instance, is just one of the barriers. There are other factors which can be barriers to learning, right? So there is another thing that you need to know when you're dealing with inclusive education. There is a difference between inclusion and mainstreaming. So in other words, what is inclusion? What is mainstreaming? With inclusion, we are more concerned with the support of all learners. We are more concerned about equity rather than equality. In other words, we are saying, here is a child in this class. This child needs to be supported according to the needs of the child. So we are not saying to the child, come here onto this class, we are going to see if you can fit into the class. That will be mainstreaming. If we say to a child, come here, here is our system, we will see if you fit. If you don't fit, then we take you to a special school. That is not inclusion, that is mainstreaming. Inclusion means we say to the child, welcome to our class, what are your needs, how can we help you? Then we concentrate on the needs of the child. By so doing, we are very conscious not to concentrate on only those learners with disabilities, but we look at the learners as a whole, the various needs of the learners. There are learners here who are gifted. They do not have disabilities. They also need to be included in this class, which means we are also saying to them, we can see you are gifted, we can see that you have got special needs, because a gifted child has got special needs. So inclusion says those special needs of that gifted child must be catered for. So inclusion is about saying to all learners, we welcome you in this class and we are aware of your needs and we are going to support you in your needs. Whereas mainstreaming, it's about we are aware that you have got a disability or you have got a learning difficulty, but here is our class, we've got this and this and this, come in and we see if you will fit in. That will be mainstreaming. Right, so another important thing when we're dealing with inclusive education is to be able to differentiate between intrinsic barriers and extrinsic barriers. An intrinsic barrier is a barrier within the child. In other words, the child might have probably been born with this thing in there. So that is when disability comes in. It's intrinsic, it's within the child. It's a barrier, but it's within the child. So that is like, for instance, Mkhuma, can you please make an example of an intrinsic barrier? Just an example, one example.
You know, some people talk too much because they inherited it from their parents. If talking too much is a barrier or something that prevents participation of learners in school activity, so we will say it's an intrinsic barrier. Some of the intrinsic barriers were not inherited, but kids are born with, our learners are born with. Someone who has got a visual impairment, it's something that is in the body. It is not outside in the system of education, whereas extrinsic barriers are all those factors that are within the system of education. For example, if we're talking about teachers who are underqualified to teach all of our learners in the classroom, we're talking about the extrinsic barriers. If we're talking about the shortage of resources in our classrooms, we are talking about extrinsic barriers. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mkhuma, for that explanation. So, in other words, students, you can see that the difference between intrinsic and intrinsic barriers is that even though all of them are barriers to learning, but the intrinsic ones are within the child, just like a disability, for instance, but extrinsic ones are the outside factors. So, those are the factors that are beyond the child. They are located within the system of education. Those are intrinsic barriers. Thank you.
And sometimes they are not within the system of education, but they are in the community. Like kids who are growing up in drug-infested areas, you know, those are some, or socio-economic factors. Those are some of the issues that we consider extrinsic barriers that can prevent the effective participation of our learners in our classroom activities.
Students, let me also emphasize on those intrinsic and the extrinsic barriers. Yes, Mr. Mbelu and Mr. Mkhuma has highlighted in details what those intrinsic and extrinsic barriers to learning are. But that does not mean if a child has got those intrinsic barriers, as a teacher, you cannot provide support. You cannot say, this child has got a visual impairment, therefore I cannot be able to assist that child. This module will assist you when you have qualified or when you have completed your qualification, even if when you are doing your teaching practice, so that you can be able to provide support to that learner who has got that intrinsic barrier. The other important thing in this module is the identification of those barriers to learning. And how do you identify those barriers to learning as a teacher? You will be able to identify those barriers through observing the learner or through assessing the learner. And when you observe the learner, that means you will be able to see the physical appearance. You will be able to see or to hear the learner complaining about some aspects or the behavior that the learner will be showing. Those are those are the aspects that you will be able to observe. So here we are just going to give you, or to talk about visual impairment, but that does not mean talking about the visual impairment as one of those factors that causes barriers to learning. That doesn't mean it will be the only thing that will be in the question paper. Actually, what we are presenting now doesn't mean will be in the question paper. We are just giving you examples so that you can be able to know what is it that you should learn or how you should be able to tackle to the questions in the question paper. Now, when talking about observing the appearance, for example, when you observe a learner who has got visual impairment, you will see the learner who has got squint eyes or a learner whose eyelashes are white. And then when learner is complaining about itchy eyes or when the learner is unable to see in bright light. And then the behavior is when the learner is rubbing his eyes excessively, when the learner is also blinking the eyes excessively or more than usual. And the other thing is when the learner is walking, he misses some steps. That's the behavior that the learner will be showing. So those are the manifestations if we're talking about manifestations, we are talking about the characteristics or the signs that you will be observing while you identify those barriers to learning.
Doc Motitswe, do we need some medical expertise in order to identify learners who experience barriers due to visual impairment? As teachers, do we need that skill from medical field?
No, we don't need those. We don't need the medical expertise. That is why I said, as a teacher, when you identify barriers to learning in the classroom, there are three aspects that you will be observing. Observation and assessment are the instruments or the tools that you can use to identify. We don't need medical expertise in that case. So for you to observe the learner, meaning that you'll see the appearance or the learner complaining or the behavior. So meaning that in all the factors that causes barriers to learning, those are the aspects that you will be observing: the appearance, complaints, or the behavior. I hope I responded to your answer, Mr. Mkhuma.
No, thank you. I was worried that if I have to observe this learner or identify, I need some medical expertise. But thank you, Doc.
Okay. And the other thing, students, I only from section D, I only selected visual impairment as a cause of barriers to learning. But we also have other disabilities or other impairments. For example, we have got auditory impairment, we have got physical impairment, intellectual impairment, and the others. So I only gave you examples on the visual impairment. And that is not only the aspects that can cause barriers to learning. Language is also an aspect where the learner can have barriers to learning. And when we talk about language as a barrier to learning, language has got three components. We have got spoken language, we have got reading and writing. Listening is also part of the components of language. So here I only talk about spoken, reading, and written language. So when you identify, or when the question says, explain or discuss the manifestations of spoken language, that will depend on the phase that you have registered for. For example, if you have registered for the foundation phase, you will give or you will provide the manifestations the manifestations on the foundation phase. And when you have registered for the intermediate, senior, or FET phase, you will provide the manifestation, or you will discuss those manifestations that will be in the manifestations that appear for learners in intermediate, senior, or FET phase. Thank you. Mr. Mbelu, can you take the students through on the manifestations on perceptual motor development?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Motitswe. Perceptual motor development. This is very, very important in the learner's experience, because there's no teaching and learning that can take place without perceptual motor skills being involved. So when we talk about perceptual motor skills, we have combined two sets of skills there. It's perception and it's movement. Motor is about movement. So the child has got to develop in both those aspects. So we call them perceptual motor development. Right. So for instance, when we talk about the manifestations of perceptual motor skills, in other words, we're saying the child has got a problem with perceptual motor skills. What are we talking about? We have divided that into two parts. First, we look at the perceptual manifestations, and secondly, we look at the motor manifestations, because those two give us this perceptual motor manifestation. Right. The examples, for instance, of perceptual manifestations is audio. if the child has got a problem with hearing, or the child has got a problem with eyesight, which we call visual, that is perceptual. It's not perceptual motor development, it's perceptual. So we've got motor development on the other hand, where we're talking about the gross motor development, the fine motor development, as well as the eye-body coordination. Those are motor manifestations. If I can just explain briefly to you what we mean by gross motor development of the child. We're talking about the development of bigger muscles of the child, the muscles that the child uses to walk, the muscles that the child uses to balance, the muscles that the child uses to run, to climb the trees. So these are very important, especially in the foundation phase, as we all know that. In the foundation phase, learners learn by action. It's doing all the time, it's movement. Then there is fine motor development of the child. The fine motor development is when we're talking about the finer muscles, especially of the hand. What are the manifestations of this? If the problem lies with the fine motor skills, you'll find that the child will be unable to hold the pen properly, for instance, because they cannot use their fingers as a result of the improper development of those muscles. You find that the child has got problems trying to tie their shoelaces, for instance. We are talking about fine motor development. That is how the problem will manifest when you see the child cannot do those things. And the third one, which is not on the board there, is the eye-body coordination. That is also a very important part of the perceptual motor development of the child. Because, for instance, if you give children some work to do and it's on the board, maybe you say they must copy the note on the board. What are they using there? They are using perceptual motor skills. They are using their perception, which is the eyesight, and at the same time they are using their movement, which is writing. So if there is no eye-body coordination, it means the child will fail to do these things simultaneously. The child will fail to see what's on the board and write at the same time. So it means the child has got a problem, or it's not a problem. The motor skills, perceptual motor skills, they develop with the age of the child. So, for instance, you do not expect the child that is in the foundation phase to be at the same level of perceptual motor development as the child that is in the intermediate phase, for instance. So all you've got to do as a teacher is to support. You look at the manifestations and you say, okay, this is a manifestation of a perceptual motor development. Right. So if we combine now the two, we combine the perceptual and the motor development. What are the manifestations that will tell us that the child has got a serious problem with both of them combined, which is perceptual motor manifestations? It will be laterality. What is laterality? Laterality, we are referring to whether the child is able to see what is on the right and left-hand side of its body. The child should be able to say, this is on the left-hand side of my body, this is on the right-hand side of my body. That is laterality. How is this important in our teaching? For instance, when we teach the learners to write, we say you must start on the left and move towards the right. A child that has got a problem with laterality will not be able to do that. That is why you see some of the children which have got a perceptual motor development that is not well developed. They will start wherever. They can even start on the right-hand side and move towards the left. So it means they've got a problem with laterality. They don't know where is right, where is left of my body. And then there is spatial development. Spatial development is when the child is able to see that this thing is closer to me, or those two objects are close to each other, or that book is under the table, that other book is on the table. So that is a spatial development. In other words, the child is able to see the relationship of space between the objects or between the object and the child itself.
Thank you, Mr. Mbelu. Mr. Mkhuma, can you take over?
Yes, thank you, thank you. The one of the problems that our today's classrooms experience is the rising number of children who experience epilepsy. And it's so strange that if we don't...
Excuse me, Mr. Mkhuma, just before you move on,
Yes.
I just want to remind the students that earlier on, when we were talking about the concepts that we use here, we talked about intrinsic and extrinsic factors that cause barriers to learning.
Yeah.
So can you please tell us, now that you're starting with epilepsy, whether epilepsy is intrinsic or epilepsy is extrinsic?
If I was able to redirect this question to our student, I will say, can you please tell us the answer? Because we've already provided the answer earlier, that we look at the location of the barrier, whether it is located within the child or whether it is located within the system. A system here can be education system, social system, or home environment, any system around the child. But as long as it is not within the child, it will be extrinsic.
Come on, Mkhuma, tell us, is epilepsy intrinsic or extrinsic?
I will expect that answer from you, my students, during the exam.
Okay.
You should have now, at this level of this presentation, able to master between extrinsic and extrinsic. You should have been able to relate whether language difficulties that our learners experience is extrinsic or extrinsic, whether the visual impairment is extrinsic or extrinsic, whether epilepsy, which I'm about to talk about, is extrinsic or epilepsy.
Or intrinsic.
Yes, or extrinsic. Extrinsic or intrinsic. But we will just tell you a few things. Your responsibility as a student is to go out and read as much as possible. But what we're saying here is that with epilepsy, we at times ask questions that are so relevant. A question such as, what are you expected to do as a class, as a classroom teacher, or as a teacher in the classroom, when suddenly one of the learners experiences epileptic seizures? We were thinking of those strategies because it's possible that some of our teachers will just run away and expose the child into more dangerous situation. So one of the things is, as a teacher, as an adult, we expect you to stay calm and also to calm the class. You'll see that whenever something strange happens in the classroom, children will start running around, cause chaos. No, as a teacher, you are responsible to keeping the class calm, create space, and entire tight clothing from the child, the affected child. But I'm saying this with extra caution that especially teachers in FET phases, just be sensitive of the privacy of the child. We have male teachers and a female teacher, a female child experiences seizures in the classroom. So just be cautious about what kind of things that you can do as a male teacher, or maybe you need assistance from a female teacher, or a female teacher if a child is a male child, what do you do? Because at the end of the epileptic seizure, that child will come back to the senses, and we don't want a situation that will make the child disappear for good from the classroom. So whatever that you do. I just want to emphasize just one more thing. There was this tradition that whenever someone experiences epileptic seizure, we were told, I was also told, that you have to put a spoon or you put something, an object into his mouth. we are encouraging you, students, not to put anything into the child. Instead, just make sure that tight clothing are loosened up and the child is made to lie on the side. That is what that is some of the things that we expect you to do instead of keeping hold of the child or putting something into the mouth of the child.
Mr. Mkhuma, what I have observed while we are marking the assignments and the previous examinations question, like in the assignments or in the exam, when coming to a question on providing support on epilepsy or a child who has got epilepsy, some students will give you general answers. For example, the student will tell you that a teacher must have a knowledge on what epilepsy is. That is a general question. When you say, what is it that you can do, or provide the classroom support when the child has got epilepsy, we are talking about the problem that appears at that time. Maybe, for example, the child has got a seizure at that time. What is it that you will do? Are you going to wait to get information on what epilepsy is, whereas the child has got a seizure at that time? We don't want general answers, but explain to us what is it that you will do at that moment.
Thank you for that. For that, Dr. Motitswe. The answer, if a student says, this is what a teacher should know, that is an irrelevant response. The question is, what should a teacher do if this happens in the classroom? So if you say, this is what a teacher should know, that is an irrelevant response. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Let's come now to parental support. So again, inclusive education, the support does not only go to the child. Parents also need support. Who is to support the parents? Educators have got to support the parents, because by supporting the parent, you are indirectly, as an educator, supporting the child. So when you need to support the parents, you must be aware of the pattern of the parental attitudes, as well as the factors that determine that kind of an attitude that the parent will display. For instance, there are different attitudes that parents display when they found out their children have got a disability of some sort or an impairment of some sort. Some of them will grieve, some will be very angry, some will be in denial, some will just go straight to resentment. So those are parental attitudes that are associated with a parent that has just learned that their child has got a disability. But when you look at the left-hand side there on the board, you can see that there are factors that determine these kind of attitudes. So there are factors that will determine the grief, the anger, the denial, and the resentment of a child, of the parent. For instance, the first factor there is gender of the child. How does the gender of the child affects the attitude of the parent? Right. Parents, unfortunately, attach, some parents, not all of them, some parents attach different importance to the child who is a male, a boy, as opposed to the child that is a girl. For instance, let me make an example of a parent that is grieving because their child is autistic. The gender of the child will determine the nature of the grief. To a parent who thinks a girl child is more important, the grief will not be the same as the grief that that parent would have if the child was a boy.
Is it related to maybe social convictions that maybe, for example, we say, in my community, we have this one that a boy is expected to take the generation further to extend the family. So if the boy is affected by the condition, we are not looking at this person or this boy only. We are looking at the destruction of the extension of our family. So it's so sad. It would be better if it was a girl. Is it associated to that kind of thinking?
Unfortunately, Mr. Mkhuma, it is, but it's not supposed to be. But that's the nature of the parents. It's human nature. People attach different importance, as I say, to their children, which is not supposed to be. Because once you get a child that needs support, the child needs support. Whether they are girls or they are boys, they just need support. But we cannot run away from the fact that gender of the child is a factor that can determine how the parents feel. The second factor could be the size of the family. Is the family big or is the family small? That can come in two ways. In some instances, you find that if the family is small, it's a good thing because there's less competition. It's unfortunate, again, that to some people or to some families, once you are born in a family, an extended family, there will be competition to say, my child is better than his child, but we are within the same family. So it means if we're a bigger family, the competition is bigger. So we can't, I'm trying to say we must be very careful not to say always when the family is big, then that is a negative. There can be an example that maybe Mr. Mkhuma can tell us to say if the family is big, it's a better thing. How so, Mr. Mkhuma?
Let's look at this thing as Mr. Mbelu has just mentioned here. Sometimes it is an advantage that the family is bigger because, for example, you've got a child who has got cerebral palsy, who need assistance, and you've got different members of the family in the bigger family circle who can exchange roles in taking care or in supporting the child. It's unlike in a small size family where the entire pressure that is presented by the child in the family is facing only two people, which is a husband and wife. So in bigger family, there are other advantages that the aunt will take care of the child while you're still sleeping, or someone will do this with the child, someone will walk the child, someone will do this with the child, will feed the child, and so on and so on. So that is both an advantage and also a disadvantage.
Exactly. So in other words, students, the size of the family cannot be said is a bad thing if the size is small or if the size is big, or it's a good thing if the size is small or if the size of the family is big. No, it depends. So whenever you're discussing this factor, most of the times we'll be asked to give examples. Make it a point there to give relevant examples. Right. And the third factor that can determine the attitude of the parents would be the socio-economic status of the family. Dr. Motitswe, would you like to take us through that? How could the socio-economic status of the family affect the kind of attitude that the family will have towards the disability of the child?
Okay, thank you. For example, when that child with a disability comes from a poor family, that family won't be able to take that child maybe to medical expertise or maybe to the doctor or what. So that family will have pressure on being able to support, to provide support, unlike a child who with disability who comes from a family who has got or with a higher socio-economic status. That child will get support because the family will have enough money or enough resources to take care of the child. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you. So the example that she has given, Dr. Motitswe has given, let us take it back to the examples that we have there, like grief, anger, denial, and resentment. So in other words, here is this family, it's a very poor family, and now they've found out that their child has got a disability. Remember, there's still this thing in our communities that a child that has got a disability is a burden. You need to have money to support them. Sometimes there are not enough inclusive schools. You need to take them to a special school and you don't have money. So you see the attitude of the parent now, maybe the grief, for instance, if I can make an example of that attitude, the grief of a parent that is poor compared to the grief of a parent that is rich about the child that has got a disability will not be the same. That is why we are saying these factors will determine the attitude of the parents.
Can I say something about denial?
Yes.
You know, some of the parents, you'll see that when you finally go to the classroom. You'll see that as a teacher, you have done your observations and concluded that you need the support of a parent because their child is experiencing barriers due to visual impairment. So as a teacher, you cannot address that alone. So you need the support, the involvement of the parent. So you invite the parent to come to the school. You write a letter inviting the parent to come to the school because you like to discuss this and this about the situation of the child in class. When the child comes, when the parent comes to you, then you can see that already the parent is angry because she feels that you are either ill-treating the child or she feels that you are failing to teach. We have seen examples of teachers who have been accused by the teachers of being inadequate teachers who cannot teach well. So the issue here is denial. The parent is struggling to understand or to accept that the child is experiencing difficulties due to an intrinsic barrier which must be addressed. And instead of collaborating with the teachers, they just deny the whole and blame the teacher. Thank you, sir.
All right, we've done enough regarding parental support. Let us move on now.
You will see that if you go to, especially those who are specializing on foundation phase and ECT, you will see that there are so many manifestations of behavioral challenges that young children experience. And in your study guide, there is even a list of strategies, if you are a foundation phase teacher, a list of strategies that you have to do in order to support younger children. Now, when they grow up, that is FET, we're talking adolescents here, they also have similar challenges related to behavior, but they emanate from different angles. So, hence we have included a section of Pringle's emotional needs motion. The emotions of the kids when they reach adolescence, they change, there is confusion, there is a lot of misbehavior to some of that, but our focus here as inclusive education teachers is to focus on support. I think earlier we emphasized that before you can support a child, whether it's foundation, intermediate, or FET, it's very important that you make observation. And then you identify all the factors that are related or that may be the causes of that situation. And then you can sit down and provide support. And at times you will need the assistance of the family of the child or other people within the school to provide support. So in terms of Pringle's emotional needs, there are a number of needs that we have that are listed on pages 353 to 357 of your study guide. Please read one of them. Unmet emotional needs of the child. What is important here is that as a student and as a teacher, you must be able to identify this need. For example, the need for love and security. It's one of the tricky needs because some of the teachers will find during break, this child is following you. You go to this. This is the child following you. You know, I'm very sorry to say this, that some of the young male teachers sometimes misunderstand the kids, female kids who are experiencing or undergoing this unmet emotional needs, love and security. And they think that, oh no, man, this child is after me. They are not. They are just displaying manifestations that in their life, this is what is missing. And as a teacher, you are expected to provide support. And support in a professional manner means that you assume your in loco parentis role, full role as a parent, then you provide the support. I don't mean giving money to the kid, but I mean providing emotional support to the child. For example, no, some of the kids have never received a recognition in their family. They have never been recognized for the good things that they have done. So if you do that, the child can regain self-esteem and realize that he or she is also important. And again, that will indirectly improve his or her performance in academic subjects. We have also spoken about tutorial letter 102, which is focusing on autism and Down syndrome. Usually these are the sections that we expect students who are specializing in ECD, foundation and intermediate to understand better. And in that one, we are not trying to say other students should not understand this one. There are basic things here. Tutorial letter 102 provides information about autism and Down syndrome. What is very important is to understand that the children with autism and Down syndrome are also human beings. That is our starting point in inclusive setting. They are our human beings, and there is no way that we can transform their life, because inclusion is about transforming the system so that it is more welcoming to diversity. So we are transforming as teachers, we're transforming our classrooms so that they can accept kids with autism, transforming our classroom as well as our classroom practices so that they accept kids with Down syndrome. In autism, for example, it is referred as triads of impairments, because when we talk about autism, we're looking at the struggles that the child experiences in 3 areas. It should be social interaction. A child would struggle with interacting with others, with other children, will prefer to be alone than to be in the company of others. We look at the development of language and how the child communicates with others. In that one, the most common aspect here, kids with autism, they usually avoid direct contact. So whenever there's supposed to be a direct contact between you as a teacher and them, or between them and other children, they just look away. So it depends on the severity of autism or the effect of the severity. So in some there will be little eye contact, in others there will be no eye contact at all. They just look away. Others have unusual speech. For example, you find someone at the age of 21 whose name, for example, is Sbu, saying, instead of saying, teacher, can I go out? They will say, Sbu wants to go out. Then you say, this is baby talk. Sbu is 21, but why is he talking like that? But that is part of the effect of autism. And some will repeat words, repetition of words when they're talking about things. Some of these people, not all, some of these kids, they have poor imagination. Not all. I'm stressing this because some of the kids with autism, they have high imaginative skills, very high in imaginative skill. The only thing will be that they will have high imaginative skills in science only and struggle with language and struggle with social interaction. Or they will have high imaginative skills when writing. So most of the people who have autism, they are good poetries. They can imagine and write very great poems, but they struggle with other things. They can be extremely good with numbers and extremely bad with any other thing. You know, the education system, it expects kids to pass matric. You have to pass this and this and this and this and this subject. So for a child who is only good in mathematics out of these 7 subjects, you know that that child will never have matric unless we as inclusive education teachers are prepared to push for the transformation of the education system so that it can accommodate kids who are so proficient in a specific subject and struggle with a number of them. So we provide in tutorial letter 102, we provide these aspects as well as the behavior of these learners, as well as how can we as teachers provide support. Let me warn you one more, is that if it is, there are many people who don't prefer to look others directed to the eye, so that you do not. If it is autism, it will be a triad, meaning that it will be social interaction, it will be language and communication, it will be behavior. If it does not qualify into these 3 categories, then it's not autism.
Thank you, Mr. Mkhuma. I just want to remind the students that the whole purpose of this presentation is to prepare you for the exam. So for instance, let's just look at that. There are 3 basic things that are important there when you study for the exam there. You look at the area of difficulty, you look at the behavior and how you can support the child. There's an example there. The area of difficulty, the child has got a problem with social interaction. What is the manifestation? In other words, what kind of a behavior you will see in that child? The child will struggle to form relationship, or the child will have inappropriate social contact, or the child will have little or no eye contact. And what can you do as a teacher to support that child? You introduce them into relationship systematically. What does that mean? It means, for instance, if you are a teacher in the classroom, you've got a child like this, don't simply put them into the deep end of a large group at once. They will not be able to cope. What you need to do, introduce them gradually, like they must form a 2-people group at first. They must be just with one person, the one that you identified and seen that maybe they are more comfortable with. So once you see that now the child has mastered that to be with another person, just one person, you can now start trying to move on to add more people in a group. So what I'm trying to say to you as students is that when you study that part, look at the area of difficulty, the behavior, and how you can support the child. Same goes with the language and communication. Look at that as an area of difficulty, what kind of a behavior that the child will depict, as well as how you as a teacher can support. So please remember that, especially the support part, because inclusive education is more about support.
Say, I'm reminded just one more thing about this systematical introduction into relationships. You know, most schools, I'm not sure if all schools, but I know that most schools, they have this ritual that in the morning, all kids go to assembly point and then they pray. Some of the kids, because they struggle with social interaction, some of these kids with autism, they don't prefer to go there. It's a bigger group, it's heavy on them. So if we don't understand that aspect that kids with autism struggle with a group, we will force them, we will beat them. No, beating is not allowed in our schools. But we will try to force them into the group. Then they will scream. The end result is that they will hate school because the school is forcing them into an environment which is not conducive to their condition. Thank you so much. That is support. Again, with Down syndrome, when you read for examination or when you prepare yourself to be a competent teacher after graduation, you should understand that with Down syndrome, look for characteristics, look for the implication to your teaching and learning, and also look for the learning support that you can provide as a teacher. This information is provided in details on tutorial letter 102, but I'll just touch on one thing. You know, some of the kids with Down syndrome, they have their characteristics, they have limited abilities in terms of cognition. And the implication is that they will not be able to participate well in any activity that requires abstraction, that requires comprehension. And as a teacher, if you want to support them, you are expected to limit your work or the work that you allocate to them into concrete objects, number one, and also limit the workload. So if you were, for example, expected to ask them to write a page, you rather split that one into notes. So they will write a paragraph today, a second paragraph tomorrow. So a work that other learners will take 1 hour to complete. You should expect that kids with Down syndrome can take a week or even more, because what we are trying here to address is the inflexible system of education. So the system, we are saying, it should be able to allow us to reduce the workload, to also accommodate the time frames. Remember, sometimes they will tell you that at school you have to finish this work from January to March, cover this one. Sometimes it is not possible. If we want to create a flexible learning environment, we will have to understand that kids with Down syndrome require more time than other kids. They also require more concrete work than abstract, because they struggle with that.
Students, we usually receive, especially during this time, we receive calls, we receive emails where some students will require us to give them demarcation or the scope of examination. Mr. Mkhuma earlier on has clarified that in tutorial letter 101, we have indicated all the sections that you have to study. Those sections are the contents for the ETH306W module. So for examinations, meaning that you have to study all those sections. As lecturers, we are not allowed to provide demarcation or to provide scope for examinations. That is a policy, so we cannot do that. Rather, go through a tutorial letter 101 and study in your study guide. Just follow the sections that are written in the tutorial letter 101 and study all those sections for the examinations.
Memoranda, Doc. There's something that some of our students write to us and ask for the memorandum. What can you say about that in terms of the assessment policy, UNISA assessment policy?
We don't provide memorandum. Instead, that is why we say we have issued out tutorial letter 201. It does not have the full memorandum, but it only guides students. It provides feedback on how you were supposed to respond to the questions. We don't give appropriate answers, because when we give answers, those students will take the answers as they are and they will write it, and that's plagiarism. When you take the information as it is from the study guide or as it is from the tutorial letter, that's plagiarism. So we are avoiding students to plagiarize. Rather, study with understanding so that you can be able to use your knowledge, to use your understanding in responding to the questions.
To say to students, now we've come to the end of our presentation. So I just want to wish you well in your examination, which is coming up on the 27th of November. Please remember, when you're answering the question, don't answer before you understand what the question wants. So read the question very, very carefully before you can give the answer. You must know whether it wants the manifestations, whether it needs the support, whether we're talking about the general support or specific support. So look at the question very carefully before you can answer. Good luck in your exams. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mbelu. While you are emphasized on that, also you must look at the verbs and the key points when you read the key points when you read the question. That will guide you, and also the mark allocation will also guide you. And the other thing, colleagues or students, the other important thing, copying. We usually get some scripts where the students has written some notes either on a paper or some notes on a ruler. So please, let us avoid that, because you will be penalized, and that penalty will be so harsh that it will take 3 years for you not to register at any other university in South Africa. So avoid going to the exam hall with copies or written notes on your ruler or on your hand. Let us go, that is why I emphasize that read with understanding and use your knowledge when you respond to answers. Avoid going to exam halls with written notes on your hand or on the ruler or on a piece of paper. Dr. Mkhuma, is there anything that you want to say?
Hey, no, thank you so much. Students, we wish you all the best in your examinations. And you will realize that we will send emails with all the contact email addresses that you will require for special examinations, or when you were unable to write examinations. As lecturers, unfortunately, we don't take part in those ones. So there are relevant people that you have to consult if you are unable to write the exam. We don't encourage you getting sick when you are supposed to write the exam. We encourage you to write this examination and pass and graduate. But if for unforeseen circumstances you are unable, we will provide you with all the contact details for the relevant people that should be contacted. All the best.
Okay, lastly, as lecturers of ETH306W, we are so generous. We give you 100 points in the examinations. It will depend on you whether you want to take that 100, but we would really appreciate to give us back that 100 points. Thank you and good luck.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.